Let me take you back to the early 2010s, a time when YouTube was still finding its feet, when content creator wasn't a career anyone took seriously, and when universities were desperately scrambling to figure out what this whole internet video thing actually meant for their brand. I was young. I was hungry. And I was, in hindsight, dangerously naive about the kind of workplace politics that could chew a person up and spit them out before they even knew what hit them. I had just landed what I thought was a genuine opportunity. A university, a proper, prestigious institution, wanted to build out a YouTube presence from the ground up. They'd seen the early wave of educational channels gaining traction, and the chancellor had apparently issued some top-down directive to get the university into the digital age. That directive had rolled downhill, and eventually landed on my desk in the form of a job offer. The pay wasn't glamorous. Roughly $2,200 a month. But I told myself this was a foot in the door. A chance to build a real portfolio. A launch pad. What I didn't know was that I was about to walk straight into one of the most professionally hostile environments I'd ever encountered, and that the person smiling at me across the interview table had absolutely no idea what making videos actually involved. I showed up on my first day full of energy. I had ideas. I had a notebook full of concepts, formats, styles. I was ready to build something that actually worked. Day 2, I was called into my manager's office. She was pleasant. Well-dressed. The kind of person who ran meetings with color-coded slide decks and considered synergy a meaningful word. She smiled at me the way people smile when they're about to ask you to do something impossible. She slid a document across the desk. 85 videos. In 52 weeks. I stared at the page. I looked up at her. I looked back at the page. For context, in the early 2010s, video production was slow. There were no mirrorless cameras that made cinematic footage accessible to anyone. There were no one-click color grading plugins, no AI-assisted editing, no royalty-free music libraries you could subscribe to for $15 a month. Every frame of video required deliberate, laborious effort. And I was one person. One person who, I should add, would be responsible for everything. Scripting. Location scouting. Casting. Directing. Operating camera. Recording audio. Composing original music, because yes, the university was too cost-conscious to pay for a music licensing subscription. And finally, editing it all together on software running on hardware that struggled to process 720p footage without choking, let alone 1080p. Their cameras were practically antiques. Their computers wheezed under any real workload. Which meant I'd be using my own equipment. My own software. My own hard drives. I did the math right there in the room. 85 videos divided by 52 weeks is roughly 1.6 videos per week. That doesn't sound impossible until you understand that a properly produced 3 to 10 minute video, with scripting, casting, filming, and post-production, could easily eat up 5 to 7 full working days for a solo operator in that era. There weren't enough hours in the calendar. It was mathematically impossible. I tried to explain this, calmly, professionally. I laid out the workflow. I walked her through the phases of production. I made the case as clearly as I could. She listened patiently. And then she smiled that smile again. Just give it your best go, she said. If the quality is outstanding, I won't be watching the numbers too closely. I should have pushed harder. I should have gotten that in writing. Instead, I shook her hand, walked back to my desk, and got to work. For the first month, things were surprisingly decent. My manager was engaged, almost enthusiastic. She'd swing by my workspace, watch clips over my shoulder, nod approvingly. The dynamic felt genuinely collaborative. And then something changed. It happened on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. I came back from my smoke break. I was a smoker then, and the temperature in the room was different. Not dramatically. Just, cooler. My manager's eye contact was shorter. Her responses in conversations became clipped. I didn't piece it together until a colleague pulled me aside after a team lunch. She'd actually done a facepalm when I mentioned it. Literally put her hand to her forehead. "You don't know," she said. She explained that our manager had a deeply personal vendetta against smokers. It wasn't professional. It wasn't rational. But it was real, consistent, and well documented by anyone who'd worked with her for longer than a few months. She'd campaigned to have smokers dismissed before. She'd made it her personal mission on more than one occasion. I'd become a target. Not because of my work. Not because of my output. Because of what I did on my 15-minute break. What followed was a masterclass in institutional harassment dressed up as management. She began logging every minute I was late, even on days when I had stayed until well past 9 in the evening. She noted when I wasn't reachable during lunch. She raised her eyebrows at the faint smell of cigarette smoke that clung to my jacket. She critiqued camera angles in my videos that any reasonable I would have praised. Nothing I did was right. Everything was being documented. But here's what kept me going: the work itself was undeniably good. The videos I was producing were outperforming anything the university had ever posted. Views were climbing. Watch time was up. For the first time in the channel's history, people were actually subscribing. I buried myself in the work, kept my head down, and convinced myself that results would eventually speak louder than my manager's agenda. I was wrong. 5 months in, I received the message that made my blood run cold. "Please come to the director's office at 2 o'clock. I walked in to find the director sitting behind a large desk, her expression carefully neutral. My manager was already seated to one side, and she was doing something I will never forget. She was wearing a face that I can only describe as displeased but gleeful. Like someone who was performing disappointment while internally celebrating. The director spoke first. She told me she was troubled. That she'd been informed I was significantly behind on deliverables. That it was nearly the halfway point of my contract and I had only completed 30 of my 85 videos. 30 videos in 5 months as a solo operator, working 6 days a week, averaging well over 60 hours. I would later calculate I had logged more than 1,200 hours of work in those 5 months. And those 30 videos were the highest performing content the university had ever published. I said all of this. I laid it out clearly. I reminded the director that my manager had explicitly told me quality would be prioritized over quantity. I pointed to the view counts, the engagement numbers, the genuine traction the channel was gaining for the first time. The director's expression didn't change. She glanced at my manager. My manager said nothing that helped. She suggested that perhaps I had misunderstood expectations. That perhaps my recollection of their original conversation was imperfect. Her voice was smooth and measured and entirely disconnected from the truth. The director, to her credit, or perhaps her failing, deferred to my manager. She stated that the KPI had always been 85 videos, that the numbers simply weren't there, and that she felt it was better to cut the cord now rather than allow the deficit to compound further. I asked the question that was already forming in my mind: if you're letting me go, how exactly do you plan to hit 85 videos by year's end? My manager's answer was immediate, dismissive, and dripping with condescension. "We'll hire a professional production house to finish what you couldn't." I sat very still. The director gave my manager an odd look, the kind of look that suggested even she found the response a bit much, but she nodded her support nonetheless. "You don't need to worry about that," the director said. "The manager will handle it from here." I thanked them both for their time, collected my things, and left. But something had clicked into place during those final minutes. A light bulb, slow to ignite, but suddenly blazing. Because my manager had just handed me something extraordinarily useful. She'd told me her next move. Part of my role, a part that nobody had really thought through when they assigned responsibilities, was maintaining the university's contact database of external production companies. Every reputable firm in the region that could handle video work was logged in that system, complete with email addresses, phone numbers, and account managers' names. It was the university's entire Rolodex for outsourced creative work. And I was the only person in the department who used it, updated it, or honestly even knew where it lived. My manager had zero contacts in the production industry. I knew this because I had built every single entry in that database myself, from scratch, over 5 months. She would have no choice but to go to that database when she went looking for a production house. So I went back in. And I made some changes. Every single entry, every phone number, every email address, I corrupted. Slightly wrong digits. Transposed letters. Just enough to ensure that every outreach attempt would bounce, disconnect, or disappear entirely. Every entry, that is, except one. His name doesn't matter for this story, but I'll tell you what did. He was one of my closest friends, he was enormously talented, and he was, at that moment, working as a junior director at a mid-sized production house, assigned to smaller projects, itching for something bigger, and deeply underutilized. I called him the night I was let go. I told him everything. The firing. The database. The plan taking shape in my head. He went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me exactly what you need." Here's what I proposed. I would give him a complete, comprehensive playbook for winning this contract. Not vague advice. A step-by-step strategic guide based on 5 months of intimate knowledge of the director's preferences, my former manager's blind spots, the visual language the university responded to, the specific themes and narratives they wanted to champion, and the precise language that would make decision-makers in that building feel like they'd finally found someone who understood them. In exchange, his production company would pay me a standard industry finder's fee. 15% of the total contract value. He didn't hesitate. He took me straight to his general manager. The general manager was sharp. He listened. He did the math in his head, 55 videos in roughly 4 months, produced by a full professional crew. He understood immediately that we were talking about a contract worth well into the high 6 figures. He looked at me. He looked at my friend. He said, "Draw up the contract." I spent the next 2 days essentially writing a pitch Bible. I documented the director's priorities, her language, her aesthetic sensibilities. I noted which angles the university liked to present itself from publicly: academic excellence, community engagement, student welfare. I outlined the tone, the pacing, the music style, the storytelling structures that had already proven themselves on their channel. I handed over everything I had built, packaged as a strategic insights document that my friend's team could present as their own research. 2 days after I made that call, my former workplace received an outreach from the one functioning entry in their corrupted database. My friend's production house. They came in to pitch. And the pitch, by all accounts, was extraordinary. They demonstrated a fluency with the university's identity and aspirations that seemed almost uncanny. They spoke the language. They understood the brief. They aligned perfectly with the vision. The director and my former manager were, reportedly, astonished. How had this production company so thoroughly gotten them? They signed on the spot. Now, here's where the numbers become genuinely staggering. A professional production crew. A real one, with a producer, a director of photography, a gaffer, a sound recordist, a video editor, an assistant director, and a full support team, moves fast. Outrageously fast compared to a single-person operation. They could realistically complete a polished, broadcast-quality video every 2 to 3 days. But that speed comes at a price. Each video they produced cost double to triple what I had been earning in an entire month. Multiply that across 50-plus videos, and you start arriving at a number that would make any finance department go pale. My 15% of that figure came out to roughly 15 months of my former salary. I was sitting on a beach in Bali when the wire transfer confirmation arrived. The holiday had been my first real exhale in months. I was somewhere between genuinely relaxed and still quietly processing everything that had happened when my phone rang. It was the colleague. The one who had facepalmed, the one who had warned me about the manager. Her voice had an energy to it I hadn't heard from her before. Urgent. Almost electric. "Are you sitting down?" she said. I told her I was. Literally. On a beach chair. She told me what had happened. My former manager had been fired. The director had received a call from the chancellor's office demanding an explanation for a budget overrun of catastrophic proportions. The original budget for the entire content creation initiative, the full year, including my salary, equipment, and all associated costs, had been equivalent to about 18 months of my pay. A modest allocation, clearly set with the assumption that a single in-house operator could execute the vision affordably. My former manager, desperate to prove she could deliver the 85 video KPI after what had happened with me, had approved the production house's invoices without consulting the director. Without running the numbers properly. Without doing the one basic piece of due diligence that her position demanded. The final spend had exceeded the original budget by more than 10 times. 10 times. The chancellor had not taken this well. My former manager was terminated. The director received a severe formal reprimand. The university's entire digital content initiative was put under review. My colleague relayed all of this with the quiet satisfaction of someone watching a reckoning they had long considered overdue. And I sat there on that beach, phone pressed to my ear, sun on my face, listening to the precise shape that consequence had taken. I've thought about this chapter of my life many times since then. I've turned it over from different angles, examined the choices I made, considered what it says about institutions and about people. Here's what I keep coming back to. My manager's core mistake was never about budgets or processes. It was about what happens when personal prejudice drives professional decision-making. She didn't want to fire me because I was underperforming. The metrics were clear, the work I was producing was the best content that channel had ever seen. She wanted to fire me because I smoked cigarettes on my lunch break. Everything else, the nitpicking, the documentation, the meeting in the director's office, was scaffolding built around a decision that had already been made for entirely personal reasons. The director's mistake was simpler but no less significant. She trusted someone's characterization of events without independently verifying the underlying reality. She had the data available to her. She chose not to look at it. And my former manager's final, fatal error was the one that undid her completely. She was so consumed by the need to prove she had been right about me that she threw away every professional safeguard she had in a sprint toward a finish line that ultimately destroyed her career. As for me, I won't pretend the database manipulation was a neutral act. I knew what I was doing. I made a calculated choice, and I've reflected on it honestly. But I also know that I had delivered genuinely exceptional work, that I had been targeted for reasons that had nothing to do with my performance, and that the institution offered me no meaningful avenue for recourse. Sometimes systems don't correct themselves. And sometimes the people who were supposed to protect the integrity of those systems are the ones undermining it most. My friend received a full director promotion within months of delivering the university project. The contract was his breakthrough, the kind of landmark commission that reshapes a career trajectory. Last I heard, he's running his own production division. I used my finder's fee to fund an extended holiday and to enroll in a respected film school abroad, the kind of formal training that genuinely deepened my craft and opened doors I hadn't imagined. And the university? They eventually rebuilt their content operation, more carefully and with far more realistic expectations this time. I hope, for the students whose stories deserve to be told well, that whoever came next did justice to the work. The videos I made are probably still on that channel somewhere. 30 of them. With the highest view counts they had ever seen. Not a bad legacy for someone who was told he wasn't a professional. If this story resonated with you, consider sharing it, There are more people than you'd think who've lived some version of this. And if you've got your own workplace story that ended in unexpected justice, drop it in the comments. I read every one.